Hello, everybody. My name is Tony Lau. I am the host for today's event. Without further ado, I am going to introduce our two distinguished guests, very accomplished Chinese American entrepreneurs and executives. Terry Hsiao is a serial entrepreneur, advisor, and investor in startups. I know Terry for many years. What impressed me the most is his magic touch in launching and exiting successfully with so many technology companies, and his commitment in helping startups. Our second guest is Hsiao Chu. Hsiao is a healthcare technology, corporate, government, and nonprofit executive, and experience in architecting, launching, and growing social impact enterprises, and crafting policy initiative and community-based interventions. What impressed me the most about Hsiao is his ability to launch and manage so many successful enterprise, organization, and programs at the same time. So I'm going to start talking to Terry first, and I'm going to ask him a couple of questions. And, hopefully we can all learn something from Terry and Hsiao. Terry, I know you started out as an engineer at Nextel, which by itself it was a very well-known mobile communication company, and you were one of the early staff at Nextel. I guess I'd like to find out how did you decided to launch your first startup while you were at Nextel?
Yeah,
thank
you, Tony, for the introduction, and I'm pleased to be here, and I hope to provide value to everyone who's attending, and would love to continue to foster the community that Tina has started, and we all appreciate all the efforts that Tina has now led the program. I think for me, you're right. I started as an engineer. My undergrad was in electrical and computer engineering. I think the first thing and some of you might have some experience when you start with your career and you do it, even though you excel at it, you may be thinking that what's the future that holds for you. And what I felt as I continued to climb the corporate ladder in my early 20s was I did not really see myself as someone who was satisfied with the limitation of the engineering career path. And I think the first thing what triggered me was I wanted to expand my horizon. And what I did was I started taking some MBA business level, business school classes, and ultimately that led to my decision to apply for an MBA program full time. And that's actually the first pivot in my career where I wanted to pivot from a purely technical career track to more of either a blended or more of a business-led career track. And then that led me to MIT Sloan School of Management. And interestingly enough, that's how the entrepreneurship door opened for me. Because prior to showing up at MIT, even though I was curious, I did not really understand the process of how to start a company, or how to even start the process of thinking about starting a company. So that was the first thing. The second thing is, once I gone through the process, I got a little bit experience and participated in what was then what's called the 50K business plan competition, which is now has been increased to 100K business plan competition at MIT, which students actually split, the top 3 teams split the $100,000 of prize money, which is obviously for a student, that's a lot. So once I gone through, I had some experience, and once that window has opened, and I was fortunate. This was in the late 90s, where the first wave of internet.com was sort of overtaking the the innovations, and it was really the first time ever that the venture capital community was willing to fund the young generation of entrepreneurs. Prior to, I think, my time back in the late 90s, generally, obviously there are a couple of exceptions. Steve Jobs was one of them, but there was very few, and generally you needed a lot of gray hair to be able to have enough experience to be able to raise VC money. That changed in the mid and late 90s with technology and internet. So I would say the two things that really kind of pushed me to the entrepreneur side, and actually now having started and exited 3 different companies. Number one was I noticed that I wasn't satisfied with a fairly well-defined, purely technical career path. Number two was through the process that gave me experience and exposure to startups at MIT, that prepared me to actually make the jump into starting the company. So I would say those two are the two primary milestones for myself.
Great. So can you share with us, other lessons, top lessons you learned, in growing and also exiting, many of these companies? As I said, you seem to have the magic touch. You were able to launch and grow, and then eventually have successful exit with many of them. So what are some of the things you learned to be able to do that repeatedly?
Yeah. So first of all, honestly, there isn't any magic touch. There's definitely a lot of work, a lot of pain, a lot of loneliness, and a lot of luck. But I would say my top lessons, if I would drill down, number one is when you want to start a company, or when you are interested in entrepreneurship, the first thing is whatever you want to do, you want to make sure that there's a market, or the market is growing. It's very difficult to compete and raise capital in a field that is what I would describe as like a melting ice cube. One example I normally talk about is, even though you have you have great technology, you have now invented an excellent sort of a gas power engine, even though it's like 3x better than the current gas power engine out there, you're probably not going to get a lot of attention, and you're not going to get a lot of talent to come work with you, because everything is going electric or other forms of alternative energy. So the first thing I say is find something that has a tailwind behind you, versus you have to fight all these challenges on top of a headwind. So number one lesson for me is tailwind is better than headwind. If you're a swimmer, you'll be like swimming downstream is easier than swimming upstream. So definitely before you jump into something, take a really hard look at the problem you want to solve, and see, first of all, if that's a real problem that needed to be solved. Number two is it a growing challenge? Is it a challenge that that more people are going to get excited about, versus something that you're going to have less and less people getting excited about? The second thing is it's a marathon, not a sprint. We talk a lot of times. We talk about what's called the valley of despair, the valley of death, and that is when you first start something, you have a lot of adrenaline, a lot of excitement, and you feel like you're on top of the world. You have a lot of energy, but every project, every company, every startup, every idea that you're going to work on, challenges are going to find you, or you're going to find those challenges. So once you find those challenges, are you equipped? Do you have enough passion do you have enough support around you to have enough grit to pass the valley of despair? Because a lot of times, somebody was telling me the phrase, and I thought it was interesting. She said, startups don't die, the founders just quit. So there's some truth to that, right? It's like, you before you have a real startup, you gotta make sure that you care about it, you care about the problem enough that you're gonna sustain yourself past the valley of despair. And the third thing is, what I like to talk about is develop the skill of empathy. And that goes well beyond to put yourself in the shoes of others, to feel how others will feel. The power of empathy is actually understanding all these interconnections, understand the human nature along the value chain, so that you could actually put yourself in the shoes of all the stakeholders around the problems that you want to solve, and be able to find a path that it's going to be of value to each of those stakeholders. And that's really one way to kind of accelerate the adoption, because a lot of times, you could have one specific stakeholder that is blocking you, and you need to figure out why that is. So I would say those are my top advice, mostly from personal experience of what I've gone through, and of course I also now teach entrepreneurship at Marymount University. So these are the topics that we discuss a lot, and hope that if you have any further questions, I'm sure we'll have time to answer that.
So next, I'm going to speak to Hewitt a little bit. What are the top challenges in launching and growing and so many organizations, and while you are at the same time also have professional activities and teaching and so many things at the same time? How do you do that? Hewitt?
Yeah, absolutely. First, wanted to thank you, Tony, for of course for the introduction, for facilitating this panel, but also I think a big shout out and kudos to Chia and Jordan, who I know worked really, really hard to organize and coordinate this event behind the scenes. And certainly very honored to be here with Terry to share some of what we've experienced, with everyone. So Tony, to your question, I think there's an easy answer, and then I think there's sort of like a harder answer. The easier answer is, of course, like finding the time, like how do you actually sort of fit everything together and prioritize? And, like so many people have kind of like asked me in various different forms, like, when do you actually sleep? Or like, do you have to drink lots of caffeine, and coffee, et cetera? Right. Believe it or not, I actually don't drink coffee. But, the idea is like, if it's important to you, you make the time, right? It sounds simple, right? But it's sort of harder than it really is. Because you have to really think about what's the noise, like we're being involved in so many different things, on an everyday basis. We're exposed to a lot of information, a lot of data, a lot of news, et cetera, from a lot of different sources. And so really like understanding what's crucial, what's important, what's going to, really help you move the needle on what you're trying to do. And then what else is that noise, around you that's not as important, that's maybe, distracting you. And with that, you kind of like create your set of values or principles to, focus on what truly is important and make the time for that. Like we're kind of all here to talk about like how to, like rise to the top in our careers. But I also think it's sort of hard to do that if we don't think about like how to make time for ourselves as well, like talking about, like making the time. Because I think too often, like we spend, all of our time like working. And so our own kind of health, wellness, things that are important in our, personal lives, maybe they become, second or third or fourth or even last. And, like earlier on in my career, I always thought actually that was like how, you would get to the top. You put in the long hours, you get recognized for that. You get the role or you get the promotion that you're looking for. But I think now that, I've sort of been humbled to be in a number of sort of leadership positions, I've kind of learned that it's more about being true and honest with yourself. It's sort of like, making sure that you also set aside and leave that time to really enrich the important things that matter, in your life. Because life is only so short, and doing so will give you the inspiration for the tough challenges that you have to solve for, and you have to think about that work. And then from there, you figure out how you work smarter, not harder. Figure out, like, for example, where you can lean on, your team, to support you, your colleagues, other important people that you have around you in your life. Where you can, like, delegate and trust others, where you can empower, others to really be creative or own part of what needs to get done. And then you figure out, like, what's really, really important, and what you're really good at, and you kind of, build upon that. And maybe one thing I'll kind of also mention in terms of challenges is, I guess when I was first appointed into government, that was sort of like a whole, world of challenges that I kind of, like, experienced too. One, because at that point in time, there were very limited Asian Americans in executive levels at government agencies. And two, because I seriously doubted myself, because at that point I was 26 years old. And so, like, to, have been appointed to, like, a position like that, supposedly, sort of like running and overseeing what was the largest primary care, mental health, and chronic disease care operation in the country. Like, what did I know about, like, how to actually run this mammoth of an enterprise? Like, who was going to, like, actually listen to a 26-year-old? But, you kind of really absorb and listen, to those around you, lean on, those who are around you. And then from there, I found out that actually, what, everyone around me also didn't have the answers. And so kind of, like, beginning on this journey to really, again, like, figure out what was crucial, what was important, what was just noise and distractions, what was not working well, listening more than I would, speak. And then again, like, building trust with those who I work with. And then over time, like, we figured it out together. And as a result of that, it gave me, some, I think, incredible insights into, like, the levers of what drives policy, financing, legislation, in the world around us today.
Yeah, but at the end of the day, that is a lot of tasks. Your calendar must be totally booked up all the time, huh?
It's like a game of Tetris sometimes.
Right, it must be, right. So talking about, you have done so many things, but how do you navigate your career changes? I understand in the beginning you start out and have some paramedical training, and just evolving all the way to public health and mental health and all these other things. How do you navigate that? How do you go from So can you share with us your process?
Sure. So I'll caveat this by saying I don't think there's, like, necessarily, one pathway. There's no, like, quote unquote the right way or anything like that. Of course, like, it's going to be unique and different, for everyone, and you have to find out what works for you. But for me, I think it was really around understanding, like, what's the change that I want to make in this world? Like, what's the impact that I want to leave? And then, being able to sort of, like, figure out the opportunities where I'm able to do that. Like, I always knew I wanted to fix healthcare. I, wasn't necessarily set on how exactly I was going to do that, but, there were a few observations, personal experiences, that I've, gone through, where I was drawn to just, the convolutedness, the complexity, of the healthcare system. And, as you mentioned, Tony, I've done some clinical work and some public health work. And so I look to find, like, those common themes that basically systematically plagued how vulnerable communities and communities of color really engage with and access healthcare. And I came to realize that it's not about like, fixing the system itself, like, from the systematic perspective. That's a part of it, and that's really, really important, like, from kind of the actual healthcare provider standpoint, from the payer standpoint, for example. But it's also about how do we make it easy and comfortable and safe for patients, themselves, for families of patients, to want to get care, to want to engage, with healthcare in the first place, to actually have a good experience, to actually feel heard, and seen, as they navigate this already complex, environment. And so I looked for those opportunities. And as I looked for those opportunities, I think what I also learned over time is, to not pretend to be someone that you're not. I think sometimes it's really easy to sort of want to kind of like fit yourself into what the opportunity is asking for that you really, really want, and, that may be one way of going about it. But then I think ultimately, you have to be honest and true to yourself. Like figure out what, you can do uniquely, or like what is the special kind of experiences, the background, the insights, that you're able to bring to the table, and kind of like, and then find those opportunities where you can really stretch yourself in those areas. That way you have like this common thread and this common theme that you can, draw upon as you navigate across, different careers, so that even as you go from career to career, it doesn't feel so foreign. Like you're kind of building upon, this journey that you're laying out, that you're creating for yourself. And, like for me, that was recognizing I built a lot of my experience both on the clinical side of it, and then also in actual like operating, in operations, hands-on like architecting, building organizations and ventures and such. And then I wanted to build upon that to now focus on like sort of like the broader strategy of the healthcare environment and landscape, as a whole, looking for those like big gaps in healthcare access and patient experience, provider capacity, quality of care, just basically being able to hone in on then what's that specific enough of a problem that I can really, really move the needle on, and how I'm able to build upon that common thread, that journey that I'm sort of like designing or crafting, for myself.
Very good. Thanks for the insight. By the way, Hewitt is also a alum of the Scholar program. To learn more about the Scholar program, I'd like to now ask Tina to give us a brief overview and share with us, her vision as the president of the, Dollars for Scholar program.
Hi, sure. Hello, everyone. So first of all, I'd like to thank our speakers, Terry and Hewitt, as well as Hsiao and Jordan from our planning committee, and Tony, our host. Hewitt mentioned before about taking time for what's important. So, I appreciate everyone making the time to plan this event today. And thank you for all of you for joining, and a special welcome to our scholars that are on the line. So Greater New York Chinese Dollars for Scholars provides college scholarships and ongoing academic, career, and life skills development resources to our scholars. And we're actually open now for our 2022 scholarships. So if you know any high school seniors, we welcome them to apply to join our community. So you could find out more information about us on our website, chinesescholarship.org. And we are also on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram. And through our LinkedIn, we'll be posting future career-oriented events on other topics as well. Following this event, we'll also be sending out a post-event survey where you can provide input on how we can improve, as well as your input on topics that you'd like to hear about. I'd also like to thank, on behalf of Greater New York Chinese Dollars for Scholars, the National Association of Asian American Professionals and Monty J. DC for helping to spread the word about this event. If you're interested in volunteering or engaging with us, again, you could find more information and contact information on our website. And also, for those of you in the New York area, on July 14th, we'll be hosting our annual awards event. So that's something that is upcoming if you're interested in joining us for an in-person event. Thank you, Tony.
Great, Tina. Now I'm going to turn it over to Chia Pang, and who's going to pose some of the questions from the audience and other people. Chia?
Great. We have many questions from the audience, so I'm happy to share a couple questions. And just to start for both speakers, how do you define success, and how did you learn to embrace risk taking?
So first of all, success is coming up with your goal and meeting it. So it obviously doesn't have to be like a monetary or status symbol related. It's whatever you what your true north would be and what's important to you. So you can establish any goal, and by reaching those goals, you you're successful. So obviously, you know, for most of the young generation, the first thing we want to prove ourselves is gaining some success in our career path, in our work environment. Again, you know, it depends on what you want. It depends on what your goals are. In terms of risk, obviously for the younger generation, the risk comes with reward. So when you think of the risk, it's really how do you know what's when you're taking risks, that means you're going for something, and that's a reward for something that you have established as your goal. So taking the risk is actually part of the journey. And what we would like to say is, you know, when you take those risks, you're learning. Whether the results are something that give you satisfaction, or, you know, whether the results are positive from maybe, you know, third-party general standards. But, you know, if you look at from the learning perspective, the more you can learn, the more you could expand yourself, your horizon, the more you increase your capacity to provide a value to the people around you and to the society. So I think taking risks is actually very positive because of the rewards and the opportunities that you could present to yourself. Hewitt, do you want to add to this?
Yeah, absolutely. And I completely agree with what you said there, Terry. So, you know, so on the definition of success, absolutely agree. You know, it's about the goal that you said, because without having that goal, how do you know how to actually measure and define, you know, success to begin with? How do you know that you're actually working towards, you know, a level of success? Well, part of what I think about is like, what is it that I want to move the needle on, or what is the impact or the change that I want to make? And for me, that's sort of how I think about success. You know, it's less so about, I don't know, like whether, like what's the position or job or anything like that. It's more so, am I actually making that difference? You know, am I actually driving that outcome through however it is, you know, that I'm trying to do it. And maybe sometimes it's through multiple different, you know, roles, or through multiple organizations, or multiple efforts, or initiatives. So I kind of think about it in terms of, you know, the actual like changing of the landscape, moving the needle. And that's more of a, I guess, that could be a more of a longer term, you know, kind of outlook. And so, you know, you can kind of like break that down into what's more immediate, you know, that you're able to reach, and how are you able to get there so that you're then able to, you know, work towards that longer term, you know, impact or outcome. And then, yeah, in terms of risk, you know, you're making hypotheses, right? And hypotheses are not necessarily just flat out assumptions or anything like that. Hypotheses are not guesses; they're educated, you know, sort of convictions, right? There's probably a reason why, you know, you're looking into whatever it is that you want to take, you know, risk on. You're probably going to want to do some, you know, research, know what the data points exist, or just knowing that maybe the fact that there are no data points to begin with, that's going to be a part of your, you know, your risk decision, you know, making, and the risk profile that you eventually want to take up. And so, you know, it's sort of like understanding, you know, what there is, what exists, what doesn't, being able to have convictions around that. And then, you know, then determining like, what are you hoping to achieve with the risks that, you know, you're thinking about taking. Because at the end of the day, again, like it's sort of like you're testing out your hypotheses. To Terry's point, you're learning as you go along and testing out the hypotheses, you know, and you know, and that will then go back to like what's the goal that you're trying to achieve.
Mm-hmm. Got it. Very helpful. And the next question is related to how to differentiate yourself for someone who is looking to get promoted and to climb the corporate ladder, or to start a business. How do you suggest the person should differentiate him or herself? And to what extent do you think higher education, such as MBA or a graduate school degree, important?
So I would say, think about what is that unique insight that you bring. You know, so do you have any experiences? Have you had personal or professional? You know, many times a lot of what drives our creativity, in the professional sense, comes from our own personal experiences, and I'm a firm believer in that. And so you kind of think about like what are those, that's only unique to you, those sort of insights and experiences that you're able to bring to the table, and how are you able to then encapsulate that in in your professional work, because that itself is going to be unique. Like you can have so many others with the same background, training, skill sets, both hard skills and soft skills and all of that. Like that's a dime a dozen. But the specific conglomeration of those experiences, those what you've learned, like that's unique to you, and so leverage that, and really capitalize off of that. In terms of higher education, that's a hard question to answer. I think it really depends. I think it depends on the industry, that you're looking to go into. Like if, like in healthcare, for example, you're not going to be able to do certain roles without the higher education period, flat out. But there are going to be certain things there you can go into. I'm actually quite, more of a believer in making sure that you get the right type of experiences than pursuing, education. And even if you're thinking about pursuing not just higher education, but like graduate education, many times that is that can be more enriched by the actual like real life experiences, the practical experiences, the professional experiences that you can bring to the table. So kind of like really think about like what are those like those actual roles and such that will really build your your skill set, build your core competencies, and that can really move the needle for you, and then sort of like weigh that with the graduate education part. Terry, do you want to add on to that?
Yeah, I think very well said. In terms of differentiation, yeah, look at what your strengths are and what your weaknesses are, and look for opportunities that your unique skill sets and passion fit what the opportunities present themselves. So like in a startup company, for example, generally we say you need to start with enough people to have the following three skill sets. The first one is like a designer. Do you have, can you design a product that's easy to use, that's eye pleasing and not overly too difficult to build. Another one would be, are you a hacker? Can you actually build something, right? So that's another skill set. The third skill set is, are you a hustler? Are you able to be able to develop relationships and acquire customers and get things done, right? So generally you need those three skill sets. And so first of all, you got to get to know yourself. You got to be able to reflect and do an honest assessment of who you are and what you want to be and what your strengths are. In terms of like a degree, the way I look at it is we need to continue to develop our capacity to learn and our capacity to think and your particular insights, as Hewitt was mentioning. So the way I look at it is the degree is one of the avenues. Obviously, it depends on what you would like to do. So from an entrepreneur perspective, what I can share is, I chose my co-founder from someone I met at MIT. He was in my same class. So there will be opportunities for you to create a network. So in terms of the degree, you got to look at the multitude of benefits that it's gonna provide you. So it's not necessarily just a degree. It's what kind of benefits that you would like to get from that, and what environment do you want to put yourself in. So I hope that answers some of your questions.
Mm-hmm. I think both speakers, you guys mentioned about the importance of building connections and networks. How do you approach in terms of building that networks? And how important do you think to find a mentor? And how do you find a mentor?
Yeah, so networking is obviously a skill set, and I can tell you, it wasn't necessary. I wasn't born with an interest to network. I was forced to network because I became an entrepreneur. And a lot of times, you know, it's based on your curiosity, right? So based on your curiosity of when you do networking, this is the way I look at it. When you do networking, number one, you gain all these different perspectives that hopefully will expand your knowledge and capacity to learn new things. Number two is that connection can lead to other connections. You know, kind of like the COVID-19, the viral effect. You know, you don't just the coefficient is not one-to-one. Like every time you spend some effort to get to know one person, you're actually creating this, you know, this viral effect of getting additional connections, additional learnings, and growth. In terms of mentor, yeah, I think absolutely is a great asset if you could find mentors. But I will also mention that I think some people may have maybe a misunderstanding of what, you know, who might be a mentor. Or the way I look at it is anyone could be a mentor. If you know, if at that point of your stage, somebody could be helpful, somebody who's willing to listen to you and share their experience. A mentor doesn't have to be that one single person. You know, think about this decentralized, democratized world that we're all going into. You can democratize mentorship. So yeah, so it's really anyone. And this is actually feeds into the concept of networking. Anyone who could provide you with this expansion of your knowledge and capacity and share experience and helping you with connections. All those are mentorship opportunities. You know, mentor doesn't mean you have to go find that one person to spend time with you. It could be anybody. It could be someone you just met. And that person might be able to mentor you for a week, you know, a day. So yeah, so that's kind of how I look at it.
Yeah, maybe just, you know, adding a few points there, just kind of building on the mentor part. You know, there's sort of, I guess, the more formal or traditional, you know, way of thinking about a mentor, you know, who's like someone who's sort of like gone through it, has, you know, tons of experience that you can ask all these questions to. And yeah, you know, those could be really helpful. Those could be really important. I definitely had my fair share of mentors who, you know, really kind of like showed me the ropes, if you will, who I was able to use as a sounding board. And sometimes it's really important to have a sounding board, and especially if you're trying to do things that don't really have a pathway, you know, or you're carving a pathway for yourself. You know, then there could also be sort of like the mentors who you are able to sort of like lean on, you know, like as a shoulder, as you know, someone to kind of like throw ideas around. I mean, there's like peer mentors, you know, for example. The thing there, I think, is just important to find out and make sure that, you know, whoever you are leaning on, that, you know, that you kind of like do your own due diligence as well, that, you know, they do bring the depth, you know, of insights and experience and such that you're looking to gain out of that relationship. And then, you know, just a note on the network part, you know, I think, you know, Terry put it really, really well. And so the only other point I'll probably add on is, you know, like similar to Terry, I wasn't really born as a networker. You know, I'm pretty introverted, as, you know, my personality. But one thing I've kind of had to learn to do is actually like to check my implicit biases at the door, because, you know, it's really easy to sort of like put a label on, you know, when you come across someone, their name, their title, you know, their experiences, like it's really easy. And we naturally do it as human beings, you know, to make assumptions, right? About, oh, is this person actually going to be helpful, you know, to me or not? Or, you know, kind of like you put your own, I don't know, label, you know, categorization on the person, but you never know, right? Like to Terry's point, like you never know, where that relationship can go. And so, just to sort of, let go of any of those like unconscious and implicit biases, in networking.
And I got one additional point I would share is before you can take advantage of mentorship, you have to make sure yourself is coachable. So you need to develop, internally, and again, if you're not coachable, there's no mentorship that can help you. So that's really important for you developing this internal skill to be coachable.
Mm-hmm.
That's a really good point.
Those are really important points. Yeah, I personally echo what you guys said. And also remember that Dollars for Scholars itself is also a great network with a lot of great people and talents. The next question is more related to identifying key trends when you're starting a company. What's the general approach in terms of identifying and staying on top of key market trends? And what resources do you leverage in terms of validating your assumptions and testing the feasibility of the product?
So I think there's actually quite a few ways you can kind of approach this. Like in healthcare in the public sector, there are a ton of like foundations, for example, like the Institute for Healthcare Improvement, the Kaiser Family Foundation, et cetera, like CDC, a number of agencies sort of, put out sort of like what the key landscapes trends are, the continued, key gaps, particularly disparities, for example, that exist in healthcare that kind of give you unique insights into like where the actual opportunities, continue to be. So those are kind of important. I think also taking a look at like market behavior, for example, it's also really important. Like, is there a lot of consolidation happening? Is there a lot of, sort of like new entrants in a particular area, and sort of like understanding the driving forces for that it's particularly helpful. So in terms of like validating or sort of adding more color, so part of it I think is like being very real and honest, with the solution and the offering that you're thinking of creating or you're building, and actually like have it go through, like usability, testing, for example, actually having people interface, with it, and making sure that you're really, really clear on who your target, group demographic and user, base is going to be, making sure that, that's also, you're very clear on like who the actual customers are, particularly maybe they're people who are paying for and buying, your product may not necessarily be the actual end users of the product. And so juggling kind of like those, key stakeholders, and sort of like, getting it, in front of the eyes of, like the decision makers as well as the actual users, giving them something to actually like, go through, and then being humble to take, be receptive, to take sort of like their feedback, using that to then inform, your decision making, using that to sort of like add, additional depth to the sort of like the market, analyses and such that you're generating for yourself. Sorry.
Yeah. First of all, be an avid reader. Stay updated with the latest topics and technology. There's now obviously great resources. There's the internet is a great asset. There's obviously you can now consume TED Talks at your fingertip. There's all kinds of podcasts and webinars. Be curious, be resourceful. Ask questions, and again, everything is a learning opportunity, and you never know what's going to trigger your passion. So if you already find some passion, continue, dig a little deeper, get additional and more well-rounded insights. If you haven't found your passion, just keep your eyes wide open and continue to absorb information, absorb knowledge, and that will come. Your passion and your calling will come. Great.
We only have 8 minutes left. 1 hour actually passed by really quickly. So the final question is giving, Terry and Hewitt, you guys are both professors at universities, and what drew you guys to become an educator, and what is one important lesson you would like to teach your students?
Yeah, so I normally say life is a series of accidents. I mean, even when I grew up, my mom's a teacher, but I never like saw myself as a teacher. But I had an opportunity and I jumped at it. I've done lots of guest lectures prior to that when I was running my own company, and I find I really enjoyed it. So I just, you know, when the opportunity presented itself, I jump at it during the pandemic. I think, you know, a couple of reasons. One is I truly believe unless you could teach it, you actually don't know it. So it actually helps me to, you know, to craft my knowledge and skills, and only by feeling comfortable teaching it, I feel like, you know, I'm comfortable with what I'm talking about. Number one. Number two is, and this is a little bit selfish. I'm in my 50s, and I really enjoy hanging out with younger people. It really provides, you know, some great energy. A lot of times, you know, the new trends and their viewpoints. Every class, I want to chat with my students and know what they're thinking about, what they're worried about, what they get excited about, and that's a benefit to me. So yeah, I really enjoy teaching. I'm glad that my students enjoy my classes. I try to make it entertaining, and it's a great resource. You know, university is a great resource. So, Hewitt.
Yeah, sure. So I guess what drew me to teaching is sort of like the idea that what we are lucky enough to learn in life, we, you know, we can probably do our humanity, if you will, sort of service and justice by not keeping it to ourselves, but being able to impart that, you know, to others. And so that's sort of, you know, like what I really enjoy and kind of, you know, find enlightening, I guess, you know, from teaching. It, you know, so Terry, kind of like jumping off of your point, so a good amount of my students are actually older than I am, and I find it's actually really interesting and insightful, kind of like also from that more selfish standpoint, to be able to interact with and sort of like challenge, like in a safe space, you know, kind of the ideas, the concepts, you know, the thinking, the frameworks, etc., you know, of those who have gone through a great amount of experiences, you know, diverse, varied, you know, experiences in different industries and such. There's not a lot of environments where you can kind of like, you know, do that openly and freely, you know, because even if it's in a professional setting, which you should be able to, you know, many times it's like around getting, like, you have a goal that you need to meet, you have to get certain things done, you know, for example. And so, you know, to have the freedom and flexibility to sort of like, you know, explore, you know, sort of the theory, the conceptual kind of, you know, frameworks, ideas, principles, etc., you know, is, you know, very enlightening. And in terms of like the lesson, I guess, to take away, you know, we teach a lot of frameworks, strategies, etc. You know, and there's always like, you know, part of academia is to put structure around something so that we're able to impart, you know, in a way that's kind of easy and to understand and comprehensible, you know, what otherwise could be really abstract, messy, you know, kind of topics. You know, and that's great and that's important, but, you know, life is messy. You know, we can't always put what happens in the real world and in life in, you know, like, you know, 2x2 matrices, right? Or, you know, the key pillars or strategies and such. And so just kind of like recognize, you know, when you use that, what you're taught, you know, in school as just like the foundation, as a jumping off point, and how you can kind of apply it, you know, more directly to yourself and what you're, you know, what you're dealing with in real life.
Yeah, perfect. I think we can keep you both for another 2-3 hours, but given it is a Saturday, we really appreciate you guys taking the time to speak with all of us. We definitely find the session to be extremely informative, and this is only a beginning. Given this is a networking session, I just want to encourage everyone to feel free to share your contact information, send LinkedIn request, and just build a community for everyone who's looking to succeed in his and her own way. And with that said, I will pass off to Tony.
Well, great. Thanks everybody for coming to this event.
All right. Well, thank you all.
All
As I mentioned, my name is Terry Hsiao. Feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. Just send me a note if you want to have any follow-up one-on-ones. I'm happy to do that.
Same, likewise. It's so great to speak with everyone, to meet everyone. Thank you again, Tony, Chia, Jordan, for really helping to bring this together, and great to be speaking in a conversation with you.